In 1989, kids' TV almost had the solution. The show on the waterfront. The sketch, The Shrink. In this sketch, The Shrink interviews Jon Pertwee, who is fully in character as the Third Doctor. The Doctor talks about his name, his enemies, and his ability to travel through time and space in a dimensionally transcendental spaceship. But during this encounter, distinguished followers, deception was in the air. For as it turned out, the only reason why the Doctor attended this interview was to plug his upcoming tour for the stage play The Ultimate Adventure, prompting the Doctor to mention names of locations in the UK such as Manchester, Bristol and Mould. The Shrink eventually summarises that the Doctor's entire life has been a lie, that these other characters are merely figments of his imagination. And this is where this throwaway sketch for a children's TV show that nobody was supposed to take seriously gets really layered. Entering the room is a Cyberman. Neomorph. It's the 80s after all. At which point the Doctor stands up and proceeds to completely no-sell the appearance of this monster, which, if anything, feeds into the idea that they are actually figments of his imagination and nobody else can see them. So, yeah, again, no closure. Does this technically count as a real encounter? Well, if I can't count the 5 Doctors as a real encounter, then I certainly can't count this. But thanks anyway to the real unknown 289 and old friend of the channel, Stephen Andreation, for bringing this sketch to my attention. Stephen actually mentions in the comments that it's frustrating that the Doctor doesn't interact with the Cyberman in any way. What is it with Jon Pertwee just not fully embracing the great villainous institution of Cybermen? I'm reading a lot of comments of people saying that Jon Pertwee reputably didn't like Cybermen, which might explain why he didn't bother to talk to this one. Probably not. Anyway, hello and welcome to round 2 of my video series all about the Third Doctor encountering Cybermen in any form, in any kind of expanded media, no matter how obscure. And in my last video, I discovered that the first real, tangible interaction that the Third Doctor had with Cybermen didn't actually come until 2007 in the form of Big Finish's Bluetooth. And what I didn't really mention in my last video, and it's something I sort of picked up on but didn't fully consciously register, is not only was this chronologically in terms of the real world creation of Doctor Who the first legitimate interaction between the Third Doctor and Cybermen, but canonically, fictionally, I do believe that it is also his first encounter with Cybermen. I mean, Liz Shaw's the ideal marker to clarify that, because in the Bluetooth story, Liz Shaw clearly had no prior knowledge of Cybermen, and Liz Shaw has been pretty much with the Doctor since day one, right? As soon as he woke up in the hospital bed, having regenerated from Patrick Troughton, she was there by his side. And we know that this story is set after Inferno because it introduces Captain Yates, who wasn't in Inferno, and obviously it's before Terror of the Autons because that's when Liz was no longer there and Joe Grant was introduced. So you can pinpoint the story in between those 2 episodes, and all evidence points to the fact that this is the very first encounter that the Third Doctor had with Cybermen. But what about the second? And that is what I'm going to be talking about in this video. The second real tangible encounter, and I say tangible because there's something a little extra I want to share with you at the end of this video, didn't come until 11 years after Bluetooth, once again at the hands of Big Finish, this time in 2018. And this is one that you can call a little bit more legitimate because Bluetooth is great, right? I mean, it's interesting because it's Liz Shaw narrating the story. It's Caroline John playing Liz Shaw narrating the story, but it's through the perspective of Liz Shaw impersonating all the other characters. So it depicts a direct interaction between the Third Doctor and a Cyberman, but through the eyes of somebody else in the room at the time. So this one that I'm about to talk about is a little bit more up close and personal as regards to the media's relationship with the audience. I am, of course, talking about 2018's Tyrants of Logic. written by Mark Platt, who is most famous for writing one of expanded media's most crucial and well-loved stories, Spare Parts. Also Big Finish. And whilst I wouldn't compare Tyrants of Logic to the brilliance of Spare Parts, it still holds a lot of treasures, and we're going to get into that. So it's a third Doctor story, and in this the third Doctor is played by Tim Treloar, hope I pronounced that surname right, and it also sees a return of Katie Manning as Jo Grant. Yay! So this story is part of the third Doctor Adventures range, and it's in the same box set as another story titled Rise of the New Humans. And I'm going to give a quick shout out to that story because it is really good fun. It features Rufus Hound once again playing the meddling monk, or the monk, or one of his many other guises. I think in this story he's called the Administrator or something like that. He's just so brimming with life and charisma. It's such good fun. And the Doctor in this story treats the monk more as an irritant than an arch rival, which he would do in the case of the Master or somebody like that. So when you combine Rise of the New Humans with Tyrants of Logic, you get this kind of thematic link of human beings being upgraded or genetically altered, if you like, for the supposed greater good of being improved. When you listen to Rise of the New Humans, it kind of sets the tone very nicely for the Tyrants of Logic, even though that in and of itself is a very different story. Tyrants of Logic is in fact something that reminds me a great deal of one of the 90s comics. Having read Emperor of the Daleks recently for a video, there are a few little beats and a few little elements to Tyrants of Logic that I think are very comic-esque. For example, they are on this planet in a mining colony, which is the straight-up horror setting for many a Doctor Who story, and yet there's like a kind of saloon bar done in the Wild West, and there's a guy who's got programs in his body to play honky-tonk piano, and there's a disgruntled barmaid. And a lot of these characters have really kooky names, such as Gusta Pardo and Chad Caramel. And one of the main supporting characters is a bounty hunter type fellow with an American accent called Hollison Greer, who you later find out is a member of the Bureau of Cyber Retribution, whose job it is specifically to destroy and wipe out Cybermen whenever and wherever they can be found. Very cyberpunky and very Doctor Who comic book-esque, as far as I can tell. So the Doctor and Jo Grant land in an abandoned mining colony going by the name of Burnt Salt in Port Anvil. Let it be known at this point that the key factor to this story is the Doctor and Jo Grant land in the TARDIS. The Doctor has his TARDIS, you figure. Let it also be known that in the previous story, Jo Grant mentions the encounter with Omega, so this pinpoints this particular story in between the Three Doctors and the Green Death, where Jo Grant leaves as a companion, which puts us in Series 10 of classic Doctor Who, somewhere along that particular point. So the only people that they meet, other than Hollison Greer the Cyber Hunter, is Gusto and Chad of the bar, which was, you know, it had a booming business back in the day when the colony was thriving, but nowadays, since it's been abandoned, no customers ever come in, and the reason for that is the Cyber Wars. Yes, that's right, this is yet another story set in the aftermath of the Cyber Wars. For anybody who hasn't watched my videos before, or for anybody who doesn't know, the Cyber Wars was meant to be this big cataclysmic event in the Doctor Who universe where Cybermen waged war on humanity across the stars and converted hundreds of planets and made thousands, presumably millions of Cybermen, and it was this big apocalyptic event that never really got covered in any shape or form until a very recent story titled The Great Cyber Wars in the Audacity box set, and through doing my research, that was the only real sort of moment where the Cyber Wars was actually covered within the Cyber Wars. All the other Cyber War stories that reference the Cyber Wars happen after the Cyber Wars. So it's something that never really gets covered in detail. It only gets covered through the testimonies of people who survived it, which is kind of cool, I guess. Guster provides his testimony of how the Cybermen tried to invade Saltburn at Port Anvil, and it all went horribly wrong for both sides, and then the humans came in and essentially liberated the planet but abandoned all the survivors, so they're there just having to fend for themselves. Interesting as well is that the Doctor doesn't know what a glitter gun is in this story, but he knows all about the Cyber Wars, and I'm thinking to myself, did he know about the Cyber Wars in the invasion? Because if he didn't, then does that mean that there is another third Doctor encounter with Cybermen somewhere along the lines? And if we are to believe that Bluetooth is the third Doctor's first encounter with Cybermen, then perhaps somewhere between that and this story there is another secret encounter, maybe where the Doctor went off on his own in the TARDIS, and that is where he learned about the Cyber Wars. So for anybody who wants to write that in Big Finish or in comic form, you have an opportunity there. I'll write it if you want. So anyway, events take a turn for the strange after the arrival of a package and the disappearance of a ship full of human crew members. The human crew members have been in fact infected with a cyber smoke. The cyber smoke is designed to prime human candidates for cyber conversion. This is a brand new concept in cyber conversion. Now, what we've learned about Cybermen is that each sort of faction, each generation of Cybermen, they have their own little way of doing things, and in this instance it's all about the cyber smoke, which is quite diabolical, because what happens is when you breathe this smoke in, you lose your humanity and have this insatiable robotic thirst for logic. You basically think like a Cyberman without becoming a Cyberman, so when it comes to the actual physical conversion, your mind is already halfway there, and so therefore it makes the process of conversion that much more smoother and less complicated. It's a very clever idea, and one that, as far as I'm aware, doesn't exist in any of the Cybermen stories, so great job to Mark Platt for introducing that into the fold. As for the package, well, all we know about this package initially is that it is addressed to a one Marion Schaeffler, who is widowed to a Mr. Bernard Schaeffler, who supposedly deceased many times ago, and he was a zoologist and a naturalist who was studying various forms of wildlife and presenting those findings in the form of documentaries across the galaxy. He was basically an intergalactic David Attenborough. We soon find out that this package is also of interest to the Cybermen themselves, or what's left of them after the Cyber War. As it turns out, the package contains something called the Leveler, and as that turns out, the Leveler is in fact a brand new cyber planner / controller / supercomputer. It's basically a new version of one of those things. It's the central hub of the Cybermen process, the hive mind if you like, and it has the potential to resurrect the Cybermen and create a new paradigm for the cyber race. So it's very important that this device must be stopped at all cost and that the Cybermen cannot get their hands on it. Upon finding out what this device actually is and what it looks like, Jo Grant lays her eyes on it and she describes it as being a giant mechanical egg. It's covered in these solar panels and it's got little cybermats crawling around it, which in itself is cool as hell. And this egg, when it comes to life, when it is activated by the invading Cybermen, it sprouts legs and starts talking. Now, I am a chimp, okay? So, naturally, when I hear this in the audio, as cool as it is, the very first thing that pops into my head is Sheldon from Orson's Farm. And why wouldn't it? But don't let that put you off, because this entity, it has a really cool voice in the audio and it gives the Doctor the opportunity to have some real squaring off interactions with the Cybermen with a level of clarity that we've never heard before. I mean, in the end of the first episode, there is a kind of false start encounter between the third Doctor and Cybermen. They meet face to face and then Greer the bounty hunter shuts them down with an electronic pulse and aggressively rips out their chest pieces. And also worth noting throughout all of this, the Doctor's hatred for Cybermen is really quite almost out of character. He actually approves to a degree of the Bureau's method of killing the Cybermen. It's straight up the Doctor approving of death. And he backpedals on this a little bit when he sees Greer executing Cybermen by shooting them in the head and such which, but still, his aggressive hatred towards Cybermen, whilst justified, is ever so slightly undoctorish, I suppose, to an extent, but, you know, you understand where he's coming from. I mean, after all, the Cybermen are already dead, essentially, and every Cyberman killed is kind of a liberation for the human host that was converted in the first place, right? But I digress. It's not until the end of episode 2 of this audio that the third Doctor has his first verbal, in character, as you are observing it or hearing it in the room as it's happening type thing with actual Cybermen. It's happened at long last.
Come in, please, gentlemen. Out of the snow. We've been expecting you.
Secure the leveler.
If you can.
The Doctor, a recognized opponent.
Sorry to ruin your plans.
It is irrelevant to our mission.
But evidently the art of sarcasm is wasted on you. If you want to retrieve your lost property, you'd better come in and get it.
This is it, the definitive first verbal eye-to-eye encounter between the third Doctor and Cybermen, where the audience are direct participants in the event. And the exchange of dialogue and the setting with which this occurs, to me, is textbook. I love it. So as this story progresses, we learn that the Cybermen are attempting to use burnt salt in Port Anvil as the ground zero for their brand new base of operations. They calculate that there's probably only about 4,000 Cybermen left in the universe, and with the guidance of this leveler new cyber planner device, it is the perfect template for them to kickstart the cyber race once again, which obviously cannot happen. But Marion Schaeffler, for all intents and purposes, she comes across initially as the new sort of Tobias Vaughan or Eric Klieg, the naive human who thinks that they can bargain with the Cybermen. But as it turns out, she's actually planning to trap the Cybermen so that she can destroy them once and for all. And this is kind of where the story culminates into a big battle at the end, where you realise that her husband, Bernard Schaeffler, isn't actually dead but has been partially converted into a Cyberman but still retains his humanity. So he helps destroy the Cybermen, and we are all good and square. I suppose if I was going to give one main criticism to this story, is that the ending is very happy. I mean, Joe Grant pretty much says that everything is wrapped up nicely, and I always think that stories involving Cybermen or Daleks should have a bit of emotional ambiguity at the end, because even though that particular plan has been thwarted, the larger race is still out there, it's still causing problems, the battle has been won but the war is not over, just a little bit more. But everything leading up to that is a gas. I love the way that Tyrants of Logic adds some new elements of Cybermen into the fold. I love the concept of the leveler, despite the fact that it is a giant walking egg, and I love the idea of the cyber smoke. And in terms of the third Doctor interacting with Cybermen once and for all, this is the one. Great stuff. So as a lot of my knowledgeable followers will have already told me in the comments, as far as audiobooks with the third Doctor encountering Cybermen is concerned, it is 2 down and 2 to go. Now, I wasn't initially planning on making a trilogy of videos about this topic. It just kind of turned out that way. And the next 2 audios that I want to talk about are very interesting indeed. So I have decided to compartmentalize them into a video all of their very own, which is where I will be going next week in my next round 3 video of the third Doctor encountering Cybermen. But before I leave, I just want to share one more thing with you. So far we have a linear progression of encounters between the third Doctor and Cybermen, which are actually consecutive in terms of fiction and canon as well. But what about something that operates outside of canon? What about a kind of forbidden encounter that happened and yet didn't happen? I am, of course, talking about Supremacy of the Cybermen. Supremacy of the Cybermen was a comic book event which was created in 2016 to mark the 50th anniversary of the existence of Cybermen, and it united the 9th Doctor with the 10th Doctor, with the 11th Doctor and the 12th Doctor to battle Cybermen across multiple timelines, because in this story the Cybermen aligned themselves with Rassilon the Tit in order to create a brand new paradigm of Time Lord Cybermen alliance, which basically completely bollocks the rest of the universe. Naturally, multiple Doctors have got to stop that. Supremacy of the Cybermen is not only a cool comic, but it is also like the ultimate homage, the ultimate celebration of Cybermen, as it depicts Cybermen across all their forms throughout their existence since 1966. I mean, you see all the different guises popping up here and there, some obscure, really nerdy ones, and even some brand new designs that they did specifically for this comic, like the cover art. The covers of the variants of these comics also depict the lost forms of Cybermen, which are basically the photo shoots that Radio Times did in the 70s, whereby they took different parts of Cybermen and mashed them all up together to make these Cybermen jumbles that never really existed in TV form. But the ultimate showcase of Cybermen that Supremacy of the Cybermen displays is not complete without its prequel comic, simply titled Prologue, which was scattered throughout other Doctor Who comics leading up to this Supremacy of the Cybermen event. And in each of these pages you see a different Doctor, all the way from 1 through to 8.5, aka the War Doctor, being yanked out of their timeline and compromised by Cybermen in this ultimate time and space hijacking of the Doctor in all of his forms. One of my favourite panels is this one, set during the events of the opening episode of An Unearthly Child, so they've completely wrecked that timeline. And this 4th Doctor one, where K9 gets converted and you see one of the proto-designs for the Dark Dimension, which never actually got made, but here's that Cyberman turning up as well. Awesome. And that brings us on to this page concerning the 3rd Doctor. There he is, sparring with the Master. That kind of looks like it's set during the Mind of Evil, I'm not sure. But they are doing the usual Pertwee Roger Delgado dance, and then suddenly there is a big rupture in the timeline. The 3rd Doctor says, "Good grief," and there is the Master being converted, and he immediately pleads for the Doctor's help. He says, "Doctor, help me, please." And what I love about this panel is that relationship between the 3rd Doctor and the Master, the chivalry, the eternal chess game between those two characters. It all goes out the window, and all you got left is one Time Lord who is absolutely terrified for his life. It makes me think there aren't enough stories that put the Cybermen over as being the ultimate villain in the Doctor Who universe. There are a lot of great Cybermen stories, but not quite as many where they are shown to be more terrifying and more deadly than anything else in the Doctor Who universe. But this moment right here really captures that essence, and that is one of the reasons why Supremacy is such a great story. And there's the 3rd Doctor going, "Good grief," so that is a legit 3rd Doctor encounter with Cybermen. But obviously, even if you haven't read the comic, you know it all gets sorted, so that gets reset. It never happens. So there you go, ending this video on a forbidden encounter between the 3rd Doctor and Cybermen. I hope you like that one. So I'm going to be returning for my final part next week, where I'm going to talk about those last 2 Big Finish audios, and I cannot wait to sink my teeth into these 2. We have got a lot to talk about. In the meantime, this is your last chance, followers. I have no doubt that you guys know more than me as Doctor Who fans, so if there are any points in history that I've missed, any other encounters between the 3rd Doctor and Cybermen that I have not mentioned, that I have overlooked, I don't care how obscure they are, I want to know about them. Please tell me, and I will also include them in my final video. In the meantime, I hope you have enjoyed this. If you want to check me out on social media, please visit my Blue Sky page at thechosenchimp.bsky.social. You can also visit me over on Patreon at patreon.com/thechosenchimp. For just £1 a month, you can become a distinguished follower and request your Doctor Who topic for coverage. Thank you so much for the people who have already requested and become a distinguished follower. I have added your name to the list, and as soon as I have finished this trilogy of videos, I'm going to get straight onto these requests, and your names will be mentioned in the video, as will the names be mentioned of anybody else who becomes a distinguished follower over on Patreon. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. You can also check me out over on TikTok. I will be dropping more content on there at some point. I'm just having a blast of doing this right now, and it's taken up a lot of my time to do the research and stuff, but I haven't fully abandoned this TikTok page. It will come back in action at some point. And there you go. I hope you guys are having a great week. I hope you are safe. Unfortunately, this chimp has been chosen for cyber conversion. So for the love of Pete and his world, have a good one.